You're listening to the Aviation Show,
brought to you by DeBella Training.
For more information, contact us on www.debella.co.za now.
And good afternoon to the Aviation Show. My name's Des and I've got the lovely Belinda joining me live from 27 Boxes in Melville. We've got the absolute honour of having Grant Naude, who's an aviation attorney, joining us in studio. Welcome, Grant.
Hi there. Thanks very much for the invitation. And how's it to the listeners?
We've got lots of difficult questions for you today, so I hope you're ready, eh?
I'm sure all clients have difficult questions.
Preparation is half of the show, so yeah.
For sure.
So start off by telling us a little bit about yourself. Start right way back. How did you get into law and why aviation law?
Yeah, why did you decide on a career in law and then aviation law?
Firstly, I think law regulates everything that you do. Whether it's driving a car, entering into business, or whatever the case may be. Aviation certainly is probably the most regulated business worldwide. I started off, I studied just a normal BProc, LLB, and then I did a further diploma in HDIP banking law.
Okay, but was there
thinking that I would use it in a commercial sense one day? And
was there no passion for aviation up until
not at that stage? I'd actually, if I tell you honestly, it was a second choice, law. I went to the training academy for SAA.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, in '94, I didn't get through into the 17 that were chosen.
Okay.
And then the default was law.
All right.
So probably a deep-seated passion for aviation, but...
so what did you want to do? Did you want to fly initially? Is that what your plan
initially
was?
I did, yes.
Okay. And then you decided to link it up and come back as
so then, obviously, after studying and doing the postgrad, most of my legal career was in commercial, 15 years or let's say 12 years in commercial. I carried that through, commercial being corporate law, liquidations, insolvencies, everything to do with regulation of companies. And in that time I met a partner in a software business,
mm-hmm.
which is also aviation related, and that can be for another show. But and then started flying. Purchased an aircraft, bought a Seneca 2, got into the flying, and then sort of merged the two passions.
Okay.
So it was quite a good inlet and a good introduction into the law. So while you're doing your PPL and all of that, you learn the law, you learn everything, and it gives you an understanding. What
licenses do you hold? Have you got a PPL.com? Okay. And how did you find it compared to the law degree? How did you find it?
Very different. You start studying MET, and probably the hardest subject to study.
MET?
Indeed, yeah.
Okay.
Des loves MET.
I find like navigation and stuff like that.
Probably the best MET is down in Cape Town in the J&B, and that's that.
Yeah. So do you work full-time as an aviation attorney?
Indeed. That's what I do full-time. I specialise in aviation law. I'm on retainer with quite a few bigger companies, retainer especially in respect of ExecuJet, and then do primarily aviation law for a number of other companies, whether Grand Central, Lanseria.
Okay. Fortunately for me, I haven't had much to do with aviation law and aviation lawyers, but we get the impression that the lawyers are not that keen to take civil aviation authority on. Is that true, or is that just a misconception?
Let me tell you the difficulty and especially one of the matters that I was involved in, and it was an aircraft that had been grounded in Libya, and we'd brought an urgent application against Civil Aviation Authority. What they wanted was the fingerprint, the dirty fingerprint work packs.
Copy, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the difficulty was actually not the CAA. It was the judge, because rightly so, the Aviation Authority said, the judge can grant the order, but if anything happens, then the blood of the pilots and whoever the aircraft may possibly
Be on their hands.
will be on his hands, and you're never going to find a judge that'll take that decision.
Yeah.
And also, and not in respect of the judge, but there's very few judges which understand the implications or the aviation law in itself.
So tell us quickly, what are some of the aspects that make aviation law so complicated?
Look, as I said, aviation law is aviation is the most regulated environment in the world.
And that makes it safe.
Indeed, and the primary aspect of aviation is safety. So when you look at the regulations, the technical standards, the Aviation Act, registration of aircraft, it's all geared towards safety. Aviation audits that take place on charter companies, ramp inspections that take place on private aircraft and chartered aircraft, the audits that take place on maintenance facilities and training organizations. It's just it's all law related.
It is law related. I like the law. I love the regulations. I absolutely love the regulations, and that's why I know them quite well. The thing is, people always try to make a plan to do shortcuts, and that is, I think, where the CAA have a very difficult task, because they need to set the standard and maintain that standard. Otherwise, we will lose our international status, and then we can't fly as South African registered aircraft. We can't fly into other countries. And I think sometimes people forget that it is the law, and it is not for the people that stick to the law, but rather the people that try and take shortcuts, that the law is there for.
Belinda's very modest with the law. I mean, I used to phone her and I used to say, where do I stand in this situation? And say, I go to this and this and this regulation, and she knows it at her fingertips.
Yeah, look, you've really got to, it's got to be a mistress, because you sleep with the regulations under your pillow, kind of thing. You need to have those regulations on your fingertips. You probably find the people who are most adept to that are your quality assurance and safety managers within any charter organisation or airline.
Yeah.
They certainly would know the regulations on their fingers. Those are probably the people in the charter organisations or the aviation airline that probably the hated people, because they're the ones exactly like
enforcing it.
Exactly, like Belinda said, enforcing it and saying, but you can't just look at, and that's what makes it quite complex as well. You can't just look at one part, because a part in the regulation is then also defined further in terms of the technical standards, and then not only in that part, it'll refer back to another part or another two parts, whether it's in maintenance and or leasing or whatever the case may be. So it's not just sort of there's your answer. There's a whole lot of things, and probably people try and circumvent that by saying, but that's what the regulations say, and in essence, they haven't looked at all the aspects.
But now, when they have got a finding, so they've done an audit and they've got a finding, am I correct in saying that's got to be pinned to a regulation? So in accordance with this regulation, we've got this finding.
Indeed. You can't have a situation where they make a finding without any legislative basis for it. So it'll be either a technical standard that hasn't been adhered to, or a regulation, or something in the Act even.
Yeah.
Okay. So tell us quickly on aircraft that's on a charter basis.
Yes.
How does that work with the registration of the aircraft and the operation on a charter basis? How does that work from a law aspect?
Obviously, a lot of people who purchase an asset of this nature, it's a costly acquisition. So what they're going to try and do is they will try and structure it in terms of the tax laws quite smartly. What you'll generally find is you'll find an asset-owning company out in a tax-friendly haven, and that is then the de facto owner of the aircraft. Then you will have, in order to register that aircraft in South Africa on the ZS register, you would have to have an entity here registered in South Africa that you could point towards, that has an office, an address, somebody who's actually there, a director, whatever the case may be. So then between that, you would then have the operating lease. So the operating lease cannot purely just be any sort of lease that, for example, like a dry lease, but it's regulated a lot by the Tax Act in South Africa, the VAT Act, a lot of tax legislation abroad, so that the necessary income that's derived from that is paid to the right sources. Having said that, so then the registered owner then is the South African entity, so they can place that on the South African register.
And sorry to interrupt you, but what are the advantages of putting it on the South African register as opposed to the November register in America? Or?
Look, obviously it just depends where you want to operate the aircraft. If you want to operate the aircraft, let's say, for example, in the middle of Africa, ideally you don't really want to be putting it on a 5 November register, which is the Nigerian register. Because of the structure of our legislation in South Africa, obviously it increases the value of the aircraft, similar to the November register in the States and the Gulf register in the UK. So it's where you're going to operate the aircraft primarily.
But it actually affects the value where it's registered, the value of the aircraft.
Indeed it does, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then also it also affects, if you're going to operate an aircraft, say, in Nigeria, you have to have a South African maintenance base there as well, with South African engineers working on there, and that can be very complicated. Yeah, so it's in depth. There's lots of stuff to think about.
Yeah, so that's why I said, it's not just one aspect you've got to look at. There's a whole lot of intervening factors or contributing factors that add up to your decision where you want to register it, where you want to operate it, and then the structure that follows behind it.
Cool. Well, we're going to go to a quick break and we'll fire some more questions after this.
Get all of today's aviation news on one site. Visit pilotspost.com. Updated twice a week, Pilots Post is a convenient way for aviation professionals and enthusiasts to remain updated with the latest aviation technologies, products, events, and news. Aviation safety, technical information, events reports, aircraft reviews, and aviation personalities are some of our most popular articles. Now in its 5th year with more than 100,000 hits per month and almost 15,000 dedicated readers, Pilots Post is available free on the web. No registration is required. To read Pilots Post, simply go to www.pilotspost.com.
DeBella Training and Management provides South African civil aviation approved training to aircraft maintenance engineers. From engine to airframe, DeBella offers international quality courses on a wide range of aircraft. Many of our clients are from Africa and the Far East, enjoying DeBella's tranquil on-site accommodation minutes away from the airport, and also provide courses in your country depending on your training needs. DeBella's pioneering range of practical hands-on training videos augment the DeBella theoretical modules, modernizing the aviation training industry. Visit www.debella.co.za now. DeBella, you name it, we train it.
Welcome back. So let's just talk about flight rules across Africa, seeing as we're on the African topic. Tell us a little bit about the flight rules in Africa.
That's one of the other aspects that probably makes aviation law quite interesting, is you're not only dealing with your local law, it being the regulations and technical standards and the Companies Act and the Tax Act and all of that, but you're also dealing with international law, so a law between South Africa and, for example, Nigeria, relating to flight over borders, where you've got a flight from South Africa landing in Nigeria. Obviously, there's a whole lot of overflight clearances that need to be obtained. What happened in 2002 was a Yamoussoukro decision that was taken. And bear in mind that a number of conventions also regulate aviation. This was a decision that was taken to try and free up flights across border, over borders within the African continent. For example, if you had to fly in Europe, Ryanair could open up a route between Dublin and, okay, maybe not Dublin now because they're not part of the EU, but you know, from Luxembourg to another destination within Europe, and it would be quite easy for them to do so. In Africa, it's quite different. You've got your legacy airlines, your South African Airways, all that kind of stuff, who notoriously own a lot of the routes, sectors, takeoff segments at various airports, etc., etc. So it's very difficult to crack into that market if you are a newbie into the low-cost airlines or whatever the case may be. And that's probably why you find that the low-cost airlines don't operate across border that often. Yamoussoukro tried to deal with that, and it's right to call it the Yamoussoukro indecision, because 15 years later we still don't have open skies, as they call it. So there's a lot of hurdles in the way of operating within Africa, which is not economically ideal for trade relations. So Yamoussoukro tried to do that. There was another indication that they wanted to do away with these hindrances and have open skies again, and they undertook to finalise that by 2017.
And here we are in 2017. I didn't even know about this Yamoussoukro indecision, as you call it. And I worked in charter and operations over that time, and I didn't even know about that. So, yeah, it's still very hard to get overflight clearances and all those.
So, obviously, working in the charter market, you would know, obviously, the freedoms, and one of the freedoms is cabotage. So, if you had to operate a flight, and let's just keep it close here, from South Africa, land at Maputo, and then pick up passengers in Maputo and take them to Tet, you wouldn't be allowed to do that. So that's cabotage. You're not allowed to do that. Obviously, there's those regulations, but one of the eighth freedom is then this open skies, which is the Yamoussoukro decision.
Okay.
Wow. So tell us about aviation accidents. Do you ever get involved, or are you ever called to be part of the investigations?
Not necessarily investigations, although we would launch a separate investigation apart from the CIA. The CIA has their own accident investigation department that bring out a report at the end of any accident or incident. And what we would then do is from a litigation basis, either deal with the insurance claim or a loss of income claim if a plaintiff's relative was on board and was injured or
and I'm sure that becomes massively complicated.
Indeed, yeah. You know, a lot of it is regulated by, for example, the general flight rules, good airmanship, dealt with in probably Part 91 of the regulations, which is the governing scenario of how flights are to take place. And then built onto that is the 127, 121, 135, you know, the light aircraft, 19 seats and under, over 19 seats, helicopters, etc., etc. So we would then get involved at the litigation stage and tie all of that together, determine from the accident report who the aviation authority deemed to be negligent or the wrongdoer. And there's various instances. It could be from an air traffic and navigation side, or the pilot itself, or it could just be unforeseen weather.
Let's say it is one of the parties, like air traffic controller or a pilot. What happens in that instance? Is there then a criminal investigation or a potential jail sentence? How does that actually work?
Well, obviously, if it's a criminal aspect, that would be instituted by the Civil Aviation Authority. That wouldn't be from a private person's perspective. From a private person's perspective, they would institute a civil claim, and the civil claim would be for let's say special damages, for loss of earnings, all that kind of stuff, and for general damages, let's say pain and suffering, if it was them or even a relative who had passed away, if there's pain and suffering.
But would that claim be against the airline operator or the actual pilot?
Whoever the wrongdoer was.
So let's, for example, the pilot was the one that was wrong. Would they go after him in his personal capacity, or
they would do so? If he had passed away in an accident, they would then proceed against the executor of his estate. If he's alive and well, they would then proceed against him, and that's obviously why we try and propose that especially the commercial pilots have some sort of professional indemnity insurance. You've worked so hard for so many years,
and it costs so much money.
To be taken for that to be taken away financially, for all that you've worked for. So. Yes, there would be that scenario. And then the other scenario is if he was employed by a company, in terms of the course and scope of his work, you would then go after the company as a second defendant. If it was an AT&S issue, yes, you would then certainly go after air traffic and navigation services. If one had to look, and this is another part of the law that comes into it, for example, the Compensation for Occupational Injuries and Diseases Act, COID, that also regulates where an employee was travelling on business and suffers injuries. It's that regulated by that act. So it's not just aviation legislation that it draws from various different aspects.
Okay, so if I understand it correctly, the CIA does investigations for safety purposes, not to establish legal liability, but there could be claims from third parties, basically, on the person or to the person that fixed the aircraft or the pilot or whatever. So CIA and the other claims and stuff could be very different. Civil claims
Correct.
compared to...
Claims, yeah.
Correct, yes. And Civil Aviation Authority has a penalty system where if they had to do an internal investigation, and find a pilot or a maintenance facility or whatever in contravention of the regulations or technical standards, they would then penalise that pilot or maintenance facility or whatever the case may be. Although they have in the recent past instituted a non-punitive approach where they try and elicit.
It's called a just culture.
I suppose that's a very nice way of putting it.
We're going to go to a quick break, and then you're going to tell us a story when we get
100%.
Real aviation stories with DeBella.
Submit your real-life story to www.debella.co.za.
And you could be featured on the Aviation Show live on brandlive.co.za or in our upcoming book.
Welcome back to the Aviation Show. And we've got the absolute pleasure of having Grant Naude in the studio with us this afternoon. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating subject, and very deep. We're going to have to get him in again to answer a couple of questions, because we've probably only got through like half of the questions
Yeah.
that are on the list.
But just quickly, tell us about the company you work for, NSH. Is that correct?
Correct, yes. Naude Sisulu Hood. We're three partners, and from my perspective, I deal solely with aviation law. As I said, there's a number of clients that I consult to. And then there's also commercial work that's done by one of my other partners, Graham Hood, and then insurance work, Vuvu Sisulu. So they tend to keep that side of it up, which I'm really proud of, and they really do a great job. And
where can people get hold of you if they decide that they want to employ a dynamic aviation attorney like yourself?
Look, they can always get onto our website, which is www.nshInc.co.za, or they could email me on grant@nshInc.co.za.
Cool.
Perfect.
We've got literally a minute for your story, so off you go.
Yeah, it was the first week while I was consulting to a big aviation firm, and there was an aircraft that they had been leasing in from a company in Dubai, and little did they know that there was landing fees and approach fees that were outstanding on it. And the aircraft had, because of that, on the Friday afternoon, which is the busiest day probably for attorneys, been impounded of no fault of theirs. And there was a mad scramble to try and address security so that aircraft could fly. It was for a flight for the Mozambican president on the Saturday. Scrambled around, managed to get some security and security for the entire claim. Obviously, the client was worried that because there was security which would be released when the aircraft came back, if the aircraft didn't come back, they would lose that security to the plaintiff in the matter. The same thing is obviously the pilot who's in control of the aircraft.
He's always scared of being locked up. Yeah, that's
exactly. So he was kind of, please don't let them arrest me. Please don't let them arrest me. We said, listen, that's fine as long as you don't fly away with the aircraft to Dubai, because our money's on board. So what happened is we put a crew member on board, and his sole instruction was the nose wheel steering pin. Without that, the aircraft basically, you'll know, Des, can't be operated.
Yeah.
So immediately on landing, the nose wheel pin was removed by this crew member, who kind of disappeared into the hangar and made sure that he was around, so that when the flight was supposed to return to South Africa, it could. So you can understand everybody on tenterhooks, from the pilot who was the actual aircraft's pilot from Dubai, didn't want to be arrested. More than R1 million up in security from the client. Our sort of reputation with the attorneys and the client in question, and sort of every sort of half an hour, just, is everything all right? Is everything all right? Do you still have the nose pin? Yes, no, he has the nose pin. And even when they were airborne, so, just on the sat phone, just to say, right, they are airborne and they're rooting for South Africa, yeah, not Dubai.
But I think if it's your money, you are worried, hey?
No, of course.
Grant, thanks so much for your time and joining us in studio.
Pleasure.
We would love to have you back again.
Yes, it was lovely.
So till next Tuesday, from all of us, goodbye.
Goodbye. See you soon.
Goodbye.
You have been listening to The Aviation Show on brandlive.co.za, proudly brought to you by DeBella Training.
Visit www.debella.co.za now. .za now. .za now. .za now.